Okay, hello everyone. Alright, so the next program in chapter 7 is lottery application. Alright, so write a lottery class that simulates a lottery. The class should have an array of 5 integers named lottery numbers. The constructor should use a random class from the Java API to generate a random number in the range of 0 through 9 for each element in the array. The class should also have a method that accepts an array of 5 integers that represent a person's lottery picks. The method is to compare the corresponding elements in the two arrays and return the number of digits that match. For example, the following shows the lottery numbers array and the users array with sample numbers stored in each. There are two matching digits, elements 2 and 4. So these are the arrays. This is the lottery number array and this is the users array. So the way it's matching these numbers, it's with your index according to this. It's saying elements 2 and 4. Normally when you're looking through this array, just by counting, you'd say that, okay, you would count like this. You'd say 7 is 1, 4 is 2, 9 is 3, 1 is 4, and 3 is 5. Normally that's how you do it. You say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But it's matching these numbers based on its index. If we're just counting, starting from 1 to 5, then we'll say that, okay, elements or the numbers in 9, okay, basically the third numbers in each array are matching. At the same time, we can also see the fifth numbers in these arrays are matching. But it's not saying third and fifth. It's saying elements 2 and 4. That's because it's using the indices. So the first element of an array has an index of 0. So it's using the index. All right. So this is index 0. This is index 1. Index 2. Right. So index 2 of each array, okay, is matching. So that's why it's saying elements 2, and 3 is index 5. So because this is 0, 1, 2, 3. Sorry, 3 is index 4. These numbers here are index 4 because it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. The last element, okay, has an index of 4. So that's why it's saying elements 2 and 4. All right. So we're going to use the same idea in matching ours as well. Okay. So in addition, the class should have a method that returns a copy of the lottery numbers array. So demonstrates the class in a program that asks the user to enter 5 numbers. The program should display the number of digits that match the randomly generated lottery numbers. If all the digits match, display a message proclaiming the user a grand prize winner. All right, so we're going to create 2 files. The first file is going to be the class itself, the lottery application class itself. And then the second file is going to be a program that's going to test the lottery application class. So let's start. So this file is going to contain the lottery application class itself. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and create a public class, and I'm going to call it lottery application. Let's go ahead and define our fields. So I'm going to define a private field. Let's read the question. It says the class should have an array of 5 integers named lottery numbers. So I'm going to define a private field. A private because I don't want code outside of this class to be able to access this field directly. I don't want code outside of this class, code that is different from code on this page. Any code outside of this page, any code that's completely different somewhere else, I don't want it to directly access, change, or modify this particular field, and that's why I'm making it private. I'm hiding the data. Rather, we are going to create public methods that we are going to, or that code outside of this class is going to use to access or change this field. That's why I'm keeping it as private. The methods that are going to access these fields are going to be public. All right, it says the class should have an array of 5 integers named lottery numbers. So I'm going to create a private integer array because it's going to hold integers. So private integer array. And I'm going to call it lottery numbers. All right. So even though it said the class should have an array of 5 integers, I'm not going to initialize it to hold 5 integers yet, right? We want the program to be flexible. We don't want it to just hold 5 lottery numbers. We want the program to be flexible in such that, in a way that in the future you can modify it so that it can run, or you can have 7 lottery numbers, or 8 lottery numbers, or 100 lottery numbers. We don't want it to be fixed. So I'm not going to go ahead and initialize it now. Rather, I'm going to use the constructor to initialize it. But the user, anytime someone tries to create an object from this class, the user is going to provide how many lottery numbers, and we're going to use that number to create an object from this class, okay, with that number. All right, so let's move on. All right, so the constructor should use the random class from the Java API to generate a random number in the range of 0 through 9 for each element in the array. All right, so we're going to work on a constructor, but we know we're going to use a random class. So in order to use a random class, we have to go ahead and import it so that this program can have access to it. So I'm doing that. I'm going to import java.util.random. So what I'm doing is I'm importing the random class located in the java.util package located in the Java API. I'm giving the program access to it. So now that the program has access to it, I'm going to use it, right? But we're going to use it in the constructor because it says the constructor should use a random class, okay, to generate a random number in the range of 0 through 9. So let's work on the constructor. Now the constructor is just like a regular method. It doesn't have the keyword static, all right? And it does not have a return type. It doesn't have a return type because we don't, explicitly call this method ourselves. This method is automatically called when someone tries to create an object from this class. So because of that, we don't specify a return type. So it's just the access specifier, which is going to be a public constructor, because this is going to be the constructor that people are going to use to generate an object from this class. So it has to be public, so code outside of this class can use it. It doesn't have the keyword static, it doesn't have a return type, so you just have to give it a name. The name of the constructor has to be the same as the name of your class. In this case, the name of our class is lottery application, so our constructor is also going to be called lottery application. Exactly the same. Case-wise, it has to be the same exactly. If you change it to the lowercase a, it's a problem because it is an uppercase a. So case-wise, it has to be the same. Apart from that, it looks just like a regular method. All right, so I mentioned that we don't want the program to be fixed. We don't want the lottery numbers to be 5. We want it to be flexible. So anytime someone tries to create an object from this class, we want the person to also provide how many lottery numbers, okay, are going to be in the lottery numbers array. And so I'm going to define a parameter for that. All right, so this is going to be an integer value, whether it's 5 or 10 or 15 or 20. The user, anyone who tries to call this constructor or tries to create an object from this class, has to provide that number. And so I'm going to specify an integer parameter, and I'm going to call it number of lottery numbers. This way. All right, so let's see. We are supposed to generate a random number in the range of 0 through 9. So we know we have to create a random object. So because we have access to it. So let's go ahead and generate a random number. So a random object, so we can use it to generate the random numbers. All right, so I'm going to create a class type variable of the random type, a reference variable, and I'm going to call it random. Now this is just a class type variable that's going to hold a random object. Now I'm going to go ahead and create a random object. So I'm going to set it equal to a new random object this way. So I know I have a variable that's or a class type variable that is holding a random object. I can use it to generate the random objects now, but I don't want to generate it now. We need to store a random number in each of these. In each of the slots of this array. Basically, we need to fill this lottery numbers array with random numbers in the range of 0 through 9. So that means that we need to write. First of all, we need to specify the length of this array, because as it stands now, we've only created a reference variable that's going to hold an array, but we haven't specified the array. We haven't created the array object yet, and we haven't specified how many elements that array is going to hold. So let's do that. We have the number of lottery numbers, which is going to be provided when someone tries to create an object from this class. And so lottery numbers, this class type variable, now is going to hold an array. Now we're going to create the array. So I'm going to create a new integer array. Now we need to specify the length of the array. The length of the array is going to be whatever the user provided here when they were trying to create an object from this class using this constructor. And so I'm going to pass in the number of lottery numbers here. So the array would hold this. So now we have an array of a particular length. And so we're going to write a loop to go through this array and in each slot. So anytime you initialize an array this way and say, okay, it's going to hold 5 numbers or 10 numbers, all the fields will initially be set to 0. So in this array, though, there are all zeros in the array. But we need to go through the array and replace those zeros with random numbers in the range of 0 through 9. So I'm going to create a loop to go through the lottery applications, to the lotteryNumbers array, right? Let me first go ahead and create the structure. So we're going to use a for loop. And I'm going to use a target variable to access each slot of the array, okay, by their index or by the indices. So I'm going to use a comment here to just explain how this works. So imagine we had an array of the numbers 6, 5, 7. Actually, let me not use commas. Let me just do this. 6, 5, 7, 2, 0, and 7. All right. So assuming we had an array of this, which was stored in these numbers. Now, the way you access each element of the array, okay, these are elements. The way you access each element of the array is by the index. The index of the first element is 0. The index of the second element is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now notice that if you're counting these numbers, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 numbers. But the index of the last element won't be 6, it will be 5. Why? Because if you're counting is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but an index used to access each element of the array, starting from the first, it starts from 0. The first element has an index of 0. Second element has an index of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Even though these are 6 elements, the index is always 1 less than the element's number. For example, if this is this is the number of the first number, its index is 0. This is the fourth number, its index is 3. This is the sixth number, but its index is 5. And the way we access these elements is by their index. So I'm going to create a target variable to access each of these elements, okay? But the point of the loop is to actually go through all the slots in the array and then fill each slot with a random number in the range of 0 through 9. So I'm going to create a target variable which is going to represent the index that we are going to use to access these elements. It's going to be an integer, right? So the index is going to be an integer 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way to the last element. So I'm going to call it, because we are going to go through the lotteryNumbers array, I'm going to call it current lottery number index. I know it's a long name. Use whatever name you're comfortable with, but I like to use long names because it makes sense for me. All right, so for int current lottery number index is equal to 0. I'm starting from 0 because the first element of the array has an index of 0. So we're accessing the first element, and then the next, and then the next, and then the next. So each time, what we're doing with this target variable is we are using it to access an element in the array. We are checking, first of all, before we use it to access an element in the array, we are checking, first of all, to see if it's less than the length of the array, and I'll explain that in a second. So for int current lottery number index is equal to 0, as long as the current lottery number index is less than the length of the array. What array are we dealing with? We're dealing with the lotteryNumbers array. Every array has a public field called length, and that stores the number of elements in the array. So I'm going to use the dot operator or the access operator to access the length of the array. So lotteryNumbers.length. So what we're doing is we are initializing current lottery number index to be equal to 0. That's what we're going to use to access the element of the array. We are checking to see if the current lottery number index is less than the length of the array. Assuming that the lotteryNumbers array had these numbers again. Another example. All the indices of this array, okay, all the indices of this array are going to be less than the length of the array. So the length of the array is basically just by counting 1. So we're starting from 5. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. There are 6 numbers here. That's the length of the array. Now the indices each of them will always be less than the length of the array. If we are starting from the first element, which has an index of 0, second element, which has an index of 1, third element, which has an index of 2, fourth has an index of 3, fifth has an index of 4, and then the sixth element has an index of 5. See, the last index is 5, even though we have 6 numbers. So all the indices will be less than the length of the array. the last element, okay, the index of the 6th element will be 5. So what we are doing is we are checking to see if the index we are going to use to access the element of the array is less than the length of the array. If it's less than the length of the array, which is 6, okay, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, these are the indexes. They're all all less than 6, which is the length of the array. If it's less than the length of the array, that means that this particular index, is a valid index that we can use to access an element in the array. So we are checking this condition first, because if the index is more than the length of the array, then we can't use that index to access an element of the array. That's going to be an invalid index. A valid index will always be less than the length of the array. So we are checking that condition first. And when we check that condition and it's true, that means we can use that index to access an element of the array. So we'll do whatever it's in the loop, right, in the block which we're about to write. And before we come back up to check again, if current lottery number index is less than lottery numbers dot length, we add 1 to current lottery number index. And we do that by saying current lottery number index plus plus. Or you can do current lottery number index plus 1, I believe. But plus plus is what I normally use. Okay? Because if you don't add 1 to current lottery number index, it will always stay 0. And 0 will always be less than the length of the array. So this will be an infinite loop. But we add 1 to the index. So the next time current lottery number index becomes 1, we check to see, okay, is 1 less than the length of the array? So in this case, 1 will be less than the length of the array, which is 6, which means we can use that index to access an element in the array. We do what's in the loop. Okay, basically we use that index to access an element in the array. And then before we come back up to check to see if current lottery number index is less than lottery numbers dot length, we add 1 to the current lottery number index. So the next time it will be 2. So basically we are using this particular index. We are increasing it all the time, and then we are using that value to that index to access an element in the array. Okay, by doing this, we are looping through the array. We are going from one slot to the next, to the next, to the next. Still making sure that we don't exceed the array, because what we are doing to make sure we don't exceed the array is with this current lottery number index is less than the length of the array. If the index is less than the length of the array, that's a valid index we can use to access an element in the array. If the current lottery number index is more than or even equal to the length of the array, that's an error. We can't use that index to access an element in the array. So the loop will stop. This loop will only allow us to access the correct element in the array, and that's it. The reason why I'm taking my time to explain this is because we're going to use the same idea to loop through arrays going forward. And it's important that we get it. This is the idea that most people use. There are other ways, but this is a common way to loop through an array. Okay, all right. So by so doing, we are just looping through the array this way. All right. So what we want to do each iteration is starting from the index of 0. We want to generate a random number, okay, and then we want to store it in the particular slot of the array using its index. All right. So in the lottery numbers array, in the particular slot, okay, using this index, okay, using its index in the particular slot, we want to set it equal to a random number in the range of 0 through 9. We have our random object here, so we can use it. Random.nextInt. Now, random.nextInt is going to generate a random integer in the range of, I believe, 0 to positive 2, whatever the length of an integer is. It's like positive 2 billion or so. But that's not what we want. We want random integer in the range of 0 through 9. The way we do that is by typing 10. All right. So when I type 10 here, this is going to generate a random number in the range of 0, okay, to 9. I'm using a comment to explain this. Right? The last number 10 here is not included. It's the upper limit, it's the ending limit, but it's not included. So when I change it to, let's say, 34, this is going to generate a random number in the range of, it starts from 0. Okay, it always starts from 0. Unless we do other things to shift the range. But if we just type in a number here, it always starts from 0. 0 to, this is going to generate a random number, random integer in the range of 0 to 33. Right? The ending limit is not included. If I change this to 3, this is going to generate a random number in the range of 0 to 2. This is just specifies where you should stop, but it's not included in the range. If I change this to 7, this is going to generate a random number in the range of 0 to 6. And so if you want a random number in the range of 0 through 9, we change this to 10. This is going to generate a random number in the range of 0 to 9. So we're going through the loop using the index to access, using the index to access the particular slot in the array, in the lottery numbers array. And in each array, we are generating a random number in the range of 0 through 9, and then we are storing it in there. So by the time this loop is done, lottery numbers will have, random integers stored, random integers in the range of 0 through 9 stored in there. All right, and so that's what the constructor is going to do. So I think we're done with the constructor. So I just wanted to explain the loop idea, and I'll do that for every video. Talk about it very carefully, and then moving forward, because we understand it, we are just going to move through it. All right, so let's see. So the class should also have a method that accepts an array of 5 integers that represent a person's lottery picks. Okay, so in the other program, in the main program, or the program with the main method, we are going to ask the user to also type in their numbers. We are going to store that in an array in the other program, and then we're going to create a method. That's what it's asking. We're going to create a method that's going to accept the user's array, which contains the user's lottery numbers, and then we're going to store it in over here. Okay, so let's see. The class should have a method that accepts an array of 5 integers. Okay, so that's exactly what we're going to do. So it's going to be a method. I like to keep my constructors as a last thing in the class, so I'll push it down, and I'll create the method above it. All right, so we're going to create an instance method. Instance methods are methods that directly work on the field of a class. Because this method is going to work on the field of a class, it's an instance method. And instance methods don't have the keyword static, right? Later on in later chapters, you'll understand why. But for now, just know that instance methods are methods that work directly on the field of a class, and they don't have the keyword static. Apart from that, I'm going to specify apart from that, it works just like a regular method. I'm going to specify the access. So it's going to be a public method, all right? No keyword, no static keyword. We need to specify the return type. So the method is going to accept an array of 5 integers. That's it. It's just going to accept an array of 5 integers. It's not really going to return anything. And so because it's not going to return anything, I'm going to specify the return type to void. Void means it's not going to return anything. And I'm going to give it a name. So it's a method that's going to accept an array of 5 integers that represent a person's lottery pick. So let's call it get. Actually, let's call it record users user lottery number. I don't know. Record users lottery number. Public void record user lottery numbers. That's fine. All right. So I'm going to create the structure. You can call it get user lottery numbers if you want, but record lottery numbers kind of makes sense because we're recording the user's lottery numbers here, or we are storing it here, or store user lottery number. Sometimes I get very OCD-ish with this stuff. I just want the names to be clear. Or I just call it get. It's fine. But you get the idea, right? You can name it whatever makes sense to you. Public void get user lottery number. And it's going to accept an array of 5 integers, okay? And it's going to represent the person's lottery picks. So if it's going to accept an array of 5 integers, then we have to define a parameter for an array of 5 integers. So I'm going to define an array of 5 integers. It's going to be an integer array. Okay, and I'm going to call it user lottery numbers because that's going to be the user's lottery numbers, right? So user lottery numbers. And once we have this, where do we store it? We need a place in our class here to store it. And so I'm going to come back up here in our fields. I'm going to define another private field. It's also going to be an integer array. I'm basically creating a class type variable just like this to hold the users array. I'm going to call it user lottery numbers. Okay, it doesn't matter if these names are the same. The scope of this parameter here is within this method, okay, and the scope of this this private field here is just within the class. They're like twins, but they're not the same, just because they're in two different areas. All right, so once we have this users array, let's store it in this field here, in our field here. So this is just a class type variable that's going to hold an array, right? So once we have it, we're in our user lottery numbers array, a class type variable here. We are going to, let's see, we're going to set it equal to whatever array was given to us. Now don't worry about because the question said that it should accept an array of 5 integers, right? So don't worry about the length of this. The length of this array will be initialized in the other program, in the main program. So when this array is being given here, it will already have whatever numbers, whatever numbers the lottery numbers, how many, it will already have how many lottery numbers are going to be in the game, okay? And so there shouldn't be any problem. So we are setting this user lottery numbers, even though they are the same names. I want to change it a little bit. I'm going to call it user lottery numbers given, right? Because this is going to be the user's lottery numbers that's going to be given to this method when it's called. And so we are setting that user lottery numbers given to our user lottery numbers field here, private field here, right? And so this private field here will store whatever array was given, okay, when this method was called. All right, so that's done with this method. So let's move on. The method is to compare the corresponding elements in the two arrays and return the number of digits that match. All right. So we're going to create another method. I like to keep the constructor as the last thing in the class. That's just my preference. You can keep it anywhere in your class. I'm going to create another method that's going to compare the corresponding element in two arrays. So basically, when this method is called, when this compare method is called, the two arrays will be initialized. First of all, when you try to create an object from the class using the constructor, the lottery numbers array will be initialized with these random numbers. And before the user, or before whoever calls this method, calls it, they will have their numbers, their lottery numbers already stored in an array before they pass it here for us to store it here in our private user lottery numbers field. So all we have to do is create a method now to compare the values in there. All right, so I'm going to create another method, another instance method. Again, instance methods don't have the keyword static because, instance method are methods that work directly on the field of a class. So because this method here was going to work on this field, on this user lottery numbers field, it's an instance method, and instance methods don't have the keyword static. All right, another instance method will be our compare lottery numbers method, which that's just the name I came up with. So it's going to also be a public method. Let's see if it's going to return anything. So it's going to compare numbers. So what I want this method to do is to compare the numbers and return another array of the numbers that matched, right? So there can be one number that matched, there can be two numbers that match, or 5 numbers that match, all the numbers, right? So I wanted to return, after comparing, return an array of all the numbers that matched. So I'm going to set the return type to be also an integer array, okay? And then I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call it compare lottery numbers. All right. So lottery numbers is not going to accept any argument. So I'm not going to define any parameters. But what this lottery numbers is going to do is I'm going to create a loop, just like what we did down here. That's going to go through an array. So we get the idea. Now it doesn't matter. Okay. It doesn't matter which loop, so which array we are going to go through, or we're going to use, to go through it doesn't matter which array we are going to access its length, right, to go through it, because they're all going to have the same number of lottery numbers. If it's 5 here, it's going to be 5 here. We're going to specify however many lottery numbers the game is going to have in our other program, okay, the program that has the main method. So it doesn't matter. We can go through the user's lottery number array or the lottery numbers array, and we can use the index to access, basically any element in any array, because we are dealing with arrays of the same length. All right. So I've created a loop. Let's just go through the user lottery numbers array, right? Because we are comparing each element there with each element in the lottery numbers array. You can do vice versa, it's the same thing. But I'm just going to start with a user lottery numbers array, or use the user lottery numbers array. Sorry, I know I'm talking fast. Sometimes I get very excited. I'm sorry. Okay, so I'm going to create a target variable, okay, to go through or to represent the index of these arrays. Since we are going to use a user lottery numbers array, I'm going to say for int current. The reason why I use current is because that number changes. This variable, the content of the current, the target variable that represents the index changes. So that's why I use current, because it changes, right? With each iteration, it becomes something else. So for int current user, it's going to be a long name. For int current user lottery number index. I'm supposed to give you a warning, right? Because it was going to be a long name. It's a warning, and it's going to be a long name. Anyway, I'm done. It's current user lottery number index. I know it's long, but use whatever name that makes sense to you. Okay, I'm going to set it to 0. Index, we want it to start at 0, right? Because we want to start from the first element to the last. So for int current user lottery number index, it goes to 0. As long as, same idea, all the indexes have to be less than the length of the array we are talking about. We're dealing with the user lottery numbers index. So as long as the current user lottery number index is less than the length of the user lottery number index, the user lottery numbers array, okay, the length of it. So we do that by accessing the length field, okay, of this array. As long as the current user lottery number index is less than the user lottery numbers dot length, we want to do what's in the loop. We want to use that index after we verify that the index is a valid index and it's not more than the length of the array. Meaning, if the index is less than the length of the array, it's a valid index, so we can use it to access an element in the array. If we verify that, let's use that index to access an element in the array. Before we come back up to check to see if current user lottery number index is less than the length of the user lottery numbers array, let's add 1 to it and then use it. So let's add 1 to it, check to see if it's a valid index and use it, and so on and so forth. We're basically going through a loop. So before we come back up to check this condition, we add 1 to current user lottery number index ++. Right? And so because these two arrays have the same length, right? It's like we're comparing two arrays side by side. If I create another, let's just tab this here. If I create another array, okay, this is just a comment, okay? If I create another array of, let's say, different numbers, assuming this is our lottery numbers array and this is our user lottery numbers array. So even though I'm going through our, as you saw, this is our users, right? Even though I'm going through our users lottery numbers array, if I use index 0 to access the first element, index 0 will also be used to can also be used to access the first element of our other array. If I use index 1, which is basically our second element, the index of our second element, to access the second element here, then we can also use index 1 to access the second element of the other array. So that's what I meant. Okay, so we can undo this, or we can just leave it there for now. I don't want it to confuse you too, so I'll leave it. And I'll create another one if I have to do that. All right, I want this to be clear. So we are going to use this index to access any of the elements in both arrays because they have the same number of elements. So we're going through, we have a structure here that's going to go through an array, okay, or two arrays of the same element. We are comparing the two numbers. So the way it's matching these numbers again is a bit different, right? So first of all, for there to be a match, the numbers have to be the same, and the position of the numbers also have to be the same. So even though we have, let's say, 7 here and 7 here, the program doesn't consider it a match because the 7 over here is the first number here, and the 7 over here is the fourth number here, so it doesn't consider them a match. The numbers have to be the same, at the same time, the position has to be the same. So the reason why 9 is a match is because, first of all, they are the same, and second of all, this is the third number in this array, and this is the third number in this array. 3 is the fifth number in this array, and 3 is the fifth number in this array, and that's how it's doing the match, okay? So we're going to code it just like that too. All right, so we're going through the array, and we are checking each time. If Okay, we're going to create an if statement to check. Okay, if the elements in the particular position of the user's lottery numbers array, okay, we are referring to the particular position using the current user lottery number index. It doesn't matter. We can use that index again with the example I just gave. We can use that index to access the particular element, or we can use that index to access the elements in the in one particular position of both arrays. And so if the current number, okay, we're accessing that number using the current user lottery number index, okay, is equal to, and notice I'm using two double equal signs. I'll come back to that. So if the current number in the user's lottery number index, numbers index, is equal to the current number in the lottery numbers index, sorry, the lottery numbers array. I keep on mixing it up. If the current number in the user lottery numbers array using our index here is equal to the current number in our lottery numbers here using the same index, okay, then there's a match, right? Notice I'm using two double equal signs here. I'm using two double equal signs to compare. If I use one double equal, one double equal sign, that's funny. If I use one equal sign here, I'm assigning what's on the right to what's on the left. But if I'm using two double equal sign, I'm comparing. I'm asking, is what's on the right equal to what's on the left? This is going to result in either true or false. If this is true, then we have a match. And so I want us to store the number at that particular position. Okay, from the user's array, I want us to store the number that particular. Well, it doesn't matter, right? Because if there's a match, then in that particular position, using our index here, right, then there will be, it will be the same number. Whether it's 5 and 5. I shouldn't have deleted that example I had here. I'll do it again. Actually, we can use this example here. Let me just shift this here like this. Yes. So basically, what we're doing is we are checking these two. The first time the loop iterates, we're checking these two numbers here. All right. We are using the same index to access these two elements. Checking are they equal? If they are not, we'll move on to the next one. Right. The index increases by 1. Okay, we are using the oops, sorry, I referred to the wrong one. They're using this index here. The index increases by 1, and we are using this index to keep track of the particular index, okay, we are on.